Testing 1, 2, 3. Testing 1, 2, 3. Can you hear us?
I can hear you.
Thank you.
We hear you.
Good morning. Today is Thursday, February 1st, 2024. Prior to calling the meeting to order, I would like to ask those members who are calling in by phone to please identify themselves. None? Thank you. As a reminder, especially today, those who may have planned on being here and had to change their plans because of the rain, if a member of this body is attending remotely, but it's not at a location specified on the agenda, they may observe and comment as a member of the public, but not participate in any member discussion or voting of this body. The meeting of the Energy and Environmental Committee is now called to order. I'd like to ask that you join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I'd like to ask the Honorable Richard Dickerson from Yucca Valley SBCTA to please lead us in the pledge. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Please join me in pledge to our flag. Ready? Begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dickerson. I'm sorry, Dennison.
That's okay.
I apologize for that twice. I wish I could promise you it won't happen again, but I do have a track record. Madam Clerk, I'd like to ask you to confirm, see if we have a quorum at this point.
We do have quorum.
Thank you. So we are holding this meeting in compliance with the Brown Act rules relating to telephonic and video conference meetings. SCAG offices are open for members of the public to attend and participate in person. Instructions for providing public comment have been provided in advance and are also included in the agenda packet. Just a reminder to reduce background noise. Please ensure that your microphone is muted when not in use. We will go ahead and now open the public comment period. For items not on the agenda. This is a time for members of the public comment to offer comment for matters that are within the SCAG's jurisdiction, but not listed on today's agenda. Staff, have we received any public comment after the deadline of 5 p.m. Wednesday, 31st?
We have received no comments.
Thank you. Do we have any members of the public who wish to speak on any item not on today's agenda?
I see no raised hands.
Thank you. I will go ahead now and close the public comment period for matters not listed on the agenda. We will now go ahead and review and prioritize agenda items. I would like to remind everyone to unmute your phone before speaking and state your name for the record during deliberations and whether you're making a motion or offering a second. For those who have joined by phone, please press *6 to mute and unmute your phone. Do we have any members of the public who wish to speak on this item?
I see no raised hands.
Okay, thank you. Nobody in the room. In order to save time, if anyone wants to pull anything from the consent calendar, I ask that we have staff present before moving to the roll call vote on the consent calendar. Appearing to be none. If no one wants to pull any items, I will then go ahead and take motions and seconds to approve the consent calendar agenda items 1 and receive and file 2 through 4.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Madam Clerk, will you please go ahead and do a roll call vote?
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. I'll proceed with the roll call. Damon Alexander. Annabelle Tran. Art Bishop.
Yes.
Phil Brock.
Yes.
Margaret Clark.
Yes.
Robert Copeland.
Copeland, yes.
Jenny Crosswhite.
Yes.
Ned Davis,
Ned Davis, yes.
Rick Dennison,
Dennison, yes.
Carmen Hernandez, Sherry Horn,
Yes.
Britt Huff,
Huff, yes.
Dan Kelmick,
Aye.
Joe Kelmick,
Yes.
Stephen Leash,
Aye.
Vianney Lopez, Lauren Meister,
Yes.
Oscar Ortiz,
Yes.
Luis Blancarte,
Blancarte, yes.
Daniel Ramos, Deborah Robertson,
Yes, present.
Nick Schultz, Jennifer Stark,
Yes.
Ali Taj,
Yes.
Tamala Takashi,
Yes.
Connor Trout,
Yes.
Stephanie Bergen,
Yes.
Dale Welty, Edward Wilson,
Hello, this is Dale Welty. I think my internet froze, but yes.
Okay, thank you. Dale Welty is yes, thank you. Mr. Vice Chair, the motion passes with 21 yeses, 0 nos, and 0 abstentions.
Thank you. We now go on to agenda item number 5, informational items, clean technology compendium. This is on page 35 of your agendas. Do we have any members of the public who wish to speak on this item?
I see no raised hands.
Okay, being none, I'd like to go ahead and call on Mr. Roland Oke, Senior Director of Clean Transportation and Energy, to present this item.
Hello, can you hear me? Hi, this is Roland Oak, Planning Supervisor here at SCAG. I'm just gonna provide a little context before passing it off to our consultant who will be who's here virtually to provide a presentation on the compendium. So on April of 2023, the Regional Council adopted Resolution 23654-5, which formalized our clean transportation technology policy. The policy provides SCAG with a framework to support the development and deployment of a zero or near zero emission transportation system. In an effort to enhance air quality, reduce GHG, achieve sustainability goals, all while adopting a technology neutral stance. Including in the resolution was a directive for staff to prepare a compendium which would aid in the development of Connect SoCal 2024 and offer our decision makers a comprehensive set of various clean technologies to potentially implement in their respective local jurisdiction. SCAG, with the assistance from ICF, has then finalized the compendium, and Sam Pornazeri, who's the Senior Director of ICF, is here virtually to provide a presentation outlining the key aspects of the compendium. So Sam, I'm gonna hand it off to you.
Thank you, Roland. Appreciate it. Good morning, Chair and the committee members. I'm Sam Pornazeri, Senior Director of Clean Transportation and Energy at ICF. We had the pleasure to work with your staff over the past year in developing the Clean Transportation Technology Compendium that Roland just talked about. So let me start my presentation by first defining clean transportation technologies. Our definition in the compendium, which is consistent with the SCAG's definition of clean transportation technology, defines these technologies as zero and near zero emission vehicles and their related infrastructure, as well as the supporting products that minimize environmental impact throughout their life cycle. So with that in mind, we initiated this project with the goal of compiling a technology compendium laying out available clean technologies and provide information on each technology with respect to their emission benefits, readiness level, implementation costs, market conditions, and ability to scale. Our focus has been on 4 major modes of transportation, namely passenger vehicles, medium and heavy duty vehicles, transit buses, and rail. But why is it important to understand the landscape of clean technology? As Roland also mentioned, and you all know, mobile sources are a significant contributor to air quality issues in the South Coast Air Basin. In 2022, transportation contributed to almost more than 80% of nitrogen oxide emissions, a precursor to ozone, and 25% of fine particulate matter emissions in the South Coast Air Basin. Aside from the air quality issues, California also has ambitious goals for adoption of zero-emission vehicles. In 2020, Governor Newsom signed an executive order which established a goal of having 100% of new passenger vehicles sold in California to be zero-emission vehicle by 2035, transitioning all drayage or port trucks to zero emission by 2035, and the rest of the medium and heavy-duty vehicle to zero emission by 2045 where feasible. So as part of this compendium, we did not just focus on the vehicles, but we also studied their charging and fueling infrastructure, as well as supporting products that facilitate the adoption of these technologies and are a vital part of the clean transportation technology ecosystem. So we studied each technology with respect to a variety of different specifications. We looked at the potential for GHG emission reductions, gauging how each technology contributes to our sustainability goals. We looked at their criteria, air pollutant emission reduction potentials, ensuring we're mindful of air quality and public health implications. We analyzed the range that each vehicle can go with one refueling or charging. We looked at the cost, breaking it down into both capital and operational costs. Longevity or expected lifespan of each technology was also assessed to ensure long-term viability. We also explored the available technical assistance, ensuring there are adequate resources for implementation and maintenance, and the potential for technology adoption, as well as the total cost of ownership, was also assessed to provide a comprehensive understanding of the financial implication of these technologies over time. Together, all these criteria guided us in making informed recommendations, decisions as part of this compendium. So in conducting this assessment, we utilize a diverse range of tools and methods to conduct our evaluation of technology. We started with extensive desk research to gather existing data and insight from a wide array of sources. And then this research was complemented by a clean technology survey, which provided us with the current specific information directly from stakeholders and experts in the field. And then to further deepen our understanding and gain nuanced perspective, we also conducted one-on-one interviews with industry professionals and key players. So with that, let's now get into some of the findings summarized in the compendium. Let's just start with the passenger vehicles. In our recent analysis for 2022, we observed a notable uptick in the adoption of zero-emission vehicles in the SCAG region, with sales exceeding 175,000 light-duty units. And demonstrating the breadth of choices available to consumers, we find out that there are 50 battery electric vehicle models available, 51 plug-in hybrid electric vehicle models, and then 3 fuel cell or hydrogen-powered vehicles available on the market. The current generation of battery electric vehicles present impressive ranges spanning somewhere between 100 to 500 miles. However, there is still an initial premium of roughly around $18,000 for electric cars and SUVs, which it is essential, which is important from the economic standpoint. However, it's also essential to note that these vehicles, despite the higher capital costs, they present long-term economic advantages to lower operational costs. So moving on to the medium and heavy-duty vehicles, in the North American market, we're witnessing an expanding array of options for zero-emission and medium and heavy-duty vehicles, with a total of 134 models available. Breaking this down further, 9 of those models are fueled by hydrogen, while the remainder predominantly adopt battery electric technology. However, within our specific region, there is a presence of only 178 units of these vehicles. While transitioning to these sustainable options is the future, it is worth highlighting the current barriers, especially the capital costs, which are approximately 3 times higher than the traditional diesel counterparts. Now let's take a look at buses. In the SCAG region, buses overwhelmingly dominate the heavy-duty zero-emission vehicle landscape. Among them, transit buses are the most prominent, followed by school buses and then coach buses. While the move toward these zero-emission alternative is promising, again, there's a notable financial barrier to consider. The capital cost of these zero-emission vehicle options is substantially steeper, estimated at around $800,000 to $1 million in comparison to the $500,000 typically required for their diesel counterpart. The rail sector is also embarking on a transformative journey, slowly transitioning to zero-emission technologies. Although these initiatives are still in very early stages, the momentum is really tangible. For example, Metrolink, for instance, has a moonshot goal to transition their rail fleet to zero emission by 2028, laying the groundwork with the Antelope Valley Line. On a similar path, the San Bernardino County Transportation Authority has set its sights on unveiling pioneering locomotives powered by both battery electric and hydrogen technology as early as this year. Moreover, BNSF Railway is also planning to replace a traditional diesel line haul locomotive with an innovative zero-emission battery-operated version. In tandem with these individual company efforts, larger transportation bodies are also stepping up. For example, Caltrans is working toward a goal of transitioning the entire intercity rail system to be fully zero-emission by 2035. Let's now shift gears to charging and fueling infrastructure. There are a suite of different charging infrastructure currently in the market, from well-known level 2 and DC fast charger to less familiar pantograph, wireless, and canopy charging technologies. We studied all of these in the compendium. With respect to the adoption of charging infrastructure, currently the region is equipped with approximately 4,300 DC fast chargers and approximately 35,000 level 2 chargers. However, we need a lot more. The California Energy Commission AB 2127 report paints a larger picture, forecasting that by 2035, California will need roughly 2 million charging stations, half of which, or about 1 million, are anticipated to be within the SCAG region. Southern California also has an expansive network of hydrogen fueling stations. Within the SCAG region, there are currently 39 active hydrogen fueling stations, and the momentum continues with the plans for 21 more in the pipeline. Notably, 5 of these operational stations cater specifically to heavy-duty vehicles and transit buses. Southern California is also known for the many natural gas fueling stations throughout the region. The natural gas fueling landscape in the region exhibits a balanced distribution spanning 4 out of the 6 counties. Los Angeles emerges prominently in this setup, leading with a total of 34 natural gas stations. When it comes to supporting products, the compendium made its best effort to capture a variety of different products that play a crucial role in advancing the clean transportation technology adoption. These integral elements not only advance the adoption of these technologies, but also optimize their functioning. The catalog encompasses essential products like battery energy storage, battery management system, vehicle to grid or building solutions, charging management solutions, and fleet telematics. When assessing the transition to zero-emission vehicles, several challenges stands out. From a cost perspective, the high upfront prices of these vehicles is a significant barrier. In terms of technology readiness, we are faced with limited models availability and longer charging times. Additionally, our current infrastructure does not adequately support zero-emission vehicles. Public zero-emission vehicle infrastructure is lacking, and constraints such as limited space for depot charging and broader real estate challenges exist. On the consumer side, many potential users have limited knowledge of the new technology and associated incentives, and there's a general lack of confidence in the technology itself. Lastly, the absence of standardized vehicle and equipment performance criteria, inconsistencies in infrastructure design, limited fundings, and delays in permitting further impede the transition. Despite encountering multiple barriers, the good news is that there are a suite of different policies at federal, state, regional, and local levels with the goal of promoting zero-emission vehicles. However, despite all these policies, it's still evident that there are significant gaps that still need to be addressed. Firstly, the lack of affordability for zero-emission vehicles poses a challenge, especially for low and moderate income communities. To put it into perspective, the average cost of a passenger zero-emission vehicles is around $18,000 more than a conventional internal combustion engine vehicle. Additionally, there is a pressing need for greater investment in charging and fueling infrastructure. Current estimates, as noted earlier, indicate that to effectively bridge the infrastructure gap, we would need to install around 3,000 chargers every week for light-duty vehicles, an additional 430 chargers for heavy-duty statewide between now and 2030. Half of those needs to happen within our region. To foster the adoption of clean technology, the compendium also proposed a set of strategic recommendations. Firstly, we advocate for targeted incentive programs to financially motivate individuals and businesses to make the switch. Enhanced public education and community outreach are crucial to raise awareness about the benefit of zero-emission vehicles. We also suggest revising building codes to incorporate clean technology infrastructure like charging stations and adjusting land use and zoning to prioritize sustainable mobility. Promoting public-private partnership can help leverage resources and expertise in the ZEV sector. Furthermore, providing technical assistance can guide potential adopters, while workforce development ensures the skilled workforce to support a transition. Lastly, it is essential for leaders and regional partners, such as municipality, to lead by example, showcasing the tangible benefits and feasibility of embracing zero-emission vehicles. With that, I will conclude my presentation. Would be happy to answer any questions you might have. Thank you.
Thank you. We will now entertain comments from members of the EEC. Just as a reminder, if a member of this body is attending remotely but not at a location specified on the agenda, they may observe but may not participate in any discussion on this body. We'll start with the Honorable Margaret Clark.
Thank you very much. There's a lot of information that's kind of new to me, understanding. Is there any way to document without, there's a lot of, I don't want to say misinformation out there, but I'm just saying that there's a lot of opinions. I personally want a balance of energy. I want clean natural gas as long as we have it, especially for buildings and stuff. But my question is, when you say zero emission vehicles, okay, the vehicle may be not emitting anything, but where is the electricity coming from? If that's coming from a non-zero, emission way means, then it's really not doing what we said. So is there a way that we can get a table of all the different ways of getting our vehicles to be zero emission without any bias, or we're not going to say this because it's really not true, whatever. If we could have a chart of what is the best and where are we coming from, where so that we know how to answer people. Because frankly, we're involved in this, and if I don't understand it all, the average public isn't going to, so we need to know what's going on. So thank you.
That's a great question. Just to answer that, in the compendium itself, in the document itself, when we assess the GHG or greenhouse gas emissions, we quantify not only emissions from the vehicles, but also what we call as upstream emissions, which is the emissions associated with the generation of electricity or fuel for those vehicles.
What was the term you just said? The what was it called? The stream?
Upstream emissions. So emissions coming out of the upstream emissions. Yeah, emissions that are upstream of the vehicles itself. Yeah.
Thank you.
So we covered both of those, and specifically today we're using in the compendium, we're using the average grid carbon intensity in California. However, with SB 100, we all know California is moving toward a carbon neutral grid by 2045, and same thing applies also with the hydrogen. Today you can find hydrogen that are produced, from petroleum, from the geologic natural gas, that in certain cases their upstream emissions could be even higher than using the a diesel vehicle. So we covered all of those in the compendium and the different nuances associated with different pathways for generating those fuels and producing those fuels, and what are the implications on the overall GHG emissions.
So is there a chart that's understandable to the average Jane Doe like me?
Yes, there are charts that actually shows the emission benefits or the emission reduction associated with each of these technology over, on an annual basis. For electricity, for diesel, for gasoline, natural gas, and hydrogen under different, pathways. So yes, there are charts included for different types of different types of vehicles and modes that we explored.
Can I ask a follow-up question?
Yes,
real
ma'am.
quick? I was driving in the rain this morning and I was behind a kind of a bus. I forget the name of it, but it talked about it didn't say zero emission, but it said clean technology or something, and it said clean natural gas. And so is there, how clean is that? What are the downsides of that? Because I'm for a balanced portfolio.
Sure, that's a great question. So with respect to natural gas, I don't know exactly about that specific bus, but
Yeah.
because of the low carbon fuel standard program in California, there are a substantial amount of natural gas that is being used in transportation that is renewable natural gas. There are different pathways for producing renewable natural gas. Some of those are through the dairy gas, capturing the dairy gases. Some of those are through the landfills, and there are other methods. And those methods often, result in significant lower carbon intensity, especially due to the avoided methane emissions that could have been released if those emissions from dairies were not captured. So, and the compendium actually covers and talks about the average carbon intensity of the natural gas that is being used in California, which is substantially lower than geological natural gas or the fossil natural gas.
Thank you very much.
Roland, did you want to make a comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to, regarding infographics and, simplified charts. We consider this compendium phase one. For the next, we don't know how many phases there's going to be, but what we want to do next is discuss internally among staff to see how we can develop like simple charts, straight to the point, less jargon, so that, everyone, not just the decision makers, has an idea as to what the best technology and solutions may be for their local jurisdictions or the region as a whole. So welcome.
Thank you, Roland. Honorable Jenny Crosswhite.
Yeah, I know that your study focused on air quality and GHG. Do you know if, as we're looking at this ZEV and ZEV rollout, if anyone is looking at the road and the impact of the plastics from the tires? Because I know that a lot of especially the battery electric vehicles are a lot heavier, which means they're going through tires a lot more quickly than a regular vehicle. So until that battery technology gets to where it's lighter, they're going to continue to burn through tires. So do you know if anyone is sort of looking at what impact it's having on some of the other, like the streets and the
Downstream.
right, the downstream?
That's a great question, and you're absolutely right. Today, battery electric vehicle technologies are heavier than their traditional or the conventional gas or diesel vehicles, mainly because of the battery itself. And the heavier the vehicles are, they will have more, they will result in more road damage, and basically the maintenance of the roads could increase. This study itself didn't capture that, didn't basically delve into that. I know for a fact, just coming from my previous role at the California Air Resources Board, that CARB is looking into tire wear emissions associated with different technologies from either the gasoline, diesels, light, medium, and heavy duty vehicles, and also potentially for battery electric vehicles are looking at tire emissions, assessing two things, both the fact that battery electric vehicles are heavier, and two, the fact that, they have higher accelerations. So their accelerations are much faster, and therefore they could result, there are some literature saying, arguing that they could result in higher tire wear emissions. are at the same time battery electric vehicle technologies because of their regenerative braking system, meaning that instead of these vehicles actually braking, they turn the motor backward. So they result in significantly lower brake wear emissions. So, which basically to some extent could counterpart the potential increase in tire wear emissions. I'm not aware of a detailed study around the impacts of battery electric vehicles on the road. There's discussions around that, especially due to the heavier vehicles and heavier weight of these vehicles, but I'm not aware, but that's a great question. And I know that there are discussions around that, but I'm not aware of any studies yet being done on that.
Thank you.
Can I follow up with that?
Please do.
Apologies. Just like what Sam said, we too have had a lot of internal discussions on that, not just battery electric, but also the impact on CAVs, connected automated vehicles. Not only is it additional gear, but there's some studies out there, I believe, that show that just driving straight, how a computer could just drive straight, has a greater impact on the road, whereas a human, no matter how still they think they are, those little micro twitch movements actually distributes the weight evenly. And so there's also implications, more so not just the emissions that we're worried about, it's also what are the financial implications as to fixing these roads, right? And so nothing's for certain, but we are having some serious conversations internally about that. So you're spot on right there.
Thank you. Honorable Oscar Ortiz.
Yeah, quick follow-up question to that. Is the heavier vehicle issue also an issue for hydrogen vehicles?
I will defer to Sam on that. I believe it adds extra weight as well too. I think cars in general, regardless over time, have just been getting bloated, regardless of technology. It's even due to safety regulations.
Okay.
If you look at today's Honda Civic, it's bigger than a 1995 Honda Accord. Like it's just cars have been getting bigger and bigger over time. And so I believe even hydrogen, I don't know what the comparison is,
Okay.
but there probably is additional weight to it.
And then my other question was, when we mentioned the need for 3,000 chargers statewide to keep up with the demand, where do we have a rate of where we're at? I know that's where we're trying to get to, but
so we did do inventory study. I'm not the project manager of that study. We do have one at SCAG, and so I can send that over to you. I believe it's the EV suitability site study. It doesn't cover the entire region. I know it's a sample, but it gives us a sense of what the state of the region is. We might have some inventory charts lying around here as well too. We are working on other plans, so we can follow up with that and see what we can find for you. But
appreciate it.
What we do know is we need a lot more.
Yeah.
And that's for certain. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
And just to add on that, so in one of the slides, we also had, a chart which is based on how California Energy Commission is tracking it. So as of today, there are roughly 35,000 level 2 chargers and 4,500 DC fast chargers. We need to get to 1 million by 2035.
Yeah.
So, so yeah, the gap is huge.
For those of you that are looking at a new business venture, that might be the way to go. We'll now go to the Honorable Rick Dennison.
Yes, thank you. And thanks, Sam, for the presentation so far. I'm kind of dovetail off of Oscar Ortiz's comments, but you cleared it up a little bit. You were stating that we're going to need 33,000. This is in your presentation, 33,000 level 2 chargers and then 3,700 DC chargers. Apparently, the numbers have changed a little bit and escalated on your last comment. And in the presentation, it says we'll need to continue to produce about 3,300 weekly. That seems pretty ambitious because that would mean it would take about 10 weeks to meet our current status of all the build out that we've done. So I'm looking again, as you talk about upstream supply for the distribution of the electricity for these different types of modes of transportation. Currently in the state, according to state numbers, we're a little bit over about 10,000 filling stations that overall in about 80% or a little over 8,000 of those are gasoline based. Now, a filling station can have many pumps at them. Some have 100 or more. But I'm trying to compare the access that people have currently and transitioning. When you talk 1 million, I'm hoping that that is including residential chargers too, to take care of one's own vehicle. So all the numbers to me they're not in alignment yet, but I appreciate you starting the conversation and adding more to it. Thank you.
Sure. So the 3,000 weekly chargers, that's a statewide number. So roughly for SCAG, you can take it half of it on a weekly basis. And that is true. I mean, compared to how many has been deployed in the SCAG region today, I mean, that's a huge number. And the reason is that, I mean, where the sales of zero emission vehicles are exponentially growing, and early adopters, they had the ability to charge at home and use their home chargers. Now we're entering into, I mean, a market that are people that are either lower income, do not necessarily have access to home chargers, or are living in multi-unit dwellings, or are renters, and they need to rely on public chargers, or they have longer commutes that with just one home charging, or I mean one time charging overnight, they cannot necessarily get their jobs done. So that is when the expansion of the EV charging infrastructure will be needed. We cannot necessarily just compare like where we are today with 35,000 and that 3,000 shows as a big number. Part of it is also the demand for public charging infrastructure and the return on investments. So as the demand goes higher, the return on investments for the private sector eventually going to look better. And therefore the investments could come in, especially with all of these flush of money through the federal fundings. I mean, from the NEVI funding, as well as the charging and fueling infrastructure discretionary grants. So still, we can't ignore the fact that 3,000 weekly is a huge number. These 3,000, again, I mean, one of the other things, caveat I have to mention, these are ports, not a fueling hub. So if a fueling hub has like 10 individual charging stations, each of those has 2 ports, that count as 20 out of these 3,000. So it's like charging ports, like nozzles at the fueling station. So hopefully that clarified it.
It was helpful. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We will now go on to, I am sorry, Mr. Brock.
Just a little bit of anecdotal evidence. I bought an electric SUV last September. So in my city, Santa Monica, which is usually on the cutting edge for a lot of these things, we have one level 3 charging station in Santa Monica with, I think, a total of 8 pumps, of which probably 2 or 3 are working at any one time. The LA Times had an expose about a week ago, extended expose on the fact that the electric charging systems that are being installed have not been regulated well by the state, county, etc. And a lot of times, they're not functional. So I think it's not only the amount of stations, it's how do we get those charging stations to be functional, and how do we add more level 3 stations, those short-term chargers. And I live in a townhouse. So I tried immediately upon purchasing my car to have, the 210 volt or whatever installed. It was going to cost me, I had 3 different electricians look, approximately $2,000 to install and run the line from the meter box, or I could do something, they could jimmy something into my box in my house, but it would take 17 hours to charge your car, and you would get a dribble overnight. So there are still a lot of issues with it. And I think we need to resolve, first and foremost, not only adding the stations everywhere, and I've talked before about hydrogen stations as well. For instance, there's 1 hydrogen fuel tank in Santa Monica, period. And I have a almost 96-year-old mother who has a hydrogen car. I'm proud of her, except there's 1 station, and that station sometimes can be down for 2 weeks at a time. So infrastructure wise, even in my area where we feel we are cutting edge, we're woefully behind. And as much as I want to tell people, yes, buy electric cars, they need to be able to charge them. And until they're comfortable charging, we've seen now electric car sales are actually dropping because people don't feel the infrastructure is there. And so they're afraid to buy those cars. Something to consider is how do we make the charging stations for all those, all those types absolutely dependable. If it's not dependable, we'll lose those goals. And so it's not only charging stations, it's making the ones we have reliable and dependable. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We'll now go to the Honorable Edward Wilson.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Coming in on this conversation a little late, but by way of reference, I own a Tesla. I got it right before the pandemic. Exciting because I haven't been to the gas station in multiple years. And it's interesting because when I do go by and look at the gas station, I'm still shocked at the prices, right? Because I don't have to pay that. I did put the charger at my house. It changed a lot. It changed a lot of versus just plugging it in, because you can just plug it in to your regular 220 volt, but you want to expand so it charges faster. So now I charge it and I can time it and have it charge at the lowest rate of time of the day or at night. So it's fully charged in the morning. I actually had Tesla come to our city. So we have a Tesla service center in Signal Hill. One of the things I did notice, and he mentioned, was the way the infrastructure has gone, right? We have charging stations in Signal Hill that we put in and that we actually own through ChargePort. And those are very, very, very slow, very slow. And so slow that they're irrelevant. No one uses them. Nobody uses them. And I tried using it at one event because I was going to a conference and I needed to charge, and I plugged it in. Well, actually, to the point, I went to the first one and it wasn't working. So I had to go or drive around, and I then found one that did work. But it was charging for an hour and it gave me nothing. So I then went over to the Tesla charging center, the superchargers, right? And within 30 minutes, I had 90% of my charge, 45 minutes maybe. And it cost me less to do that at the supercharger than it cost me at the charge point station, right? I got no charge at the charge point station. They charged me, I think it was like $12, and I went and I got the from 50% to 90%, and it cost me $12. So there was something going on, and so I'm having my city look at that. But having said all that, I compare the infrastructure to the same thing with the gas vehicles, right? Not many cities or governmental agencies own gas stations, right? It's the private market. When the cars first came out, and I think we're having the same debates that we had back then. Who wants to get a car when my horse is just as good, right? And I don't have to stop, and there's not enough gas stations, and so on and so forth, right? Those things were those are the conversations people were having back then, right? And where are we today? This is one of the reasons I'm so excited about SCAG, right? Because it's about planning. It's not about putting things in place. It's about planning and making sure that's available, right? And so I think one of the parts of the discussion is how do we really, really encourage the business community to do it, and how do we make sure that there's availability for competition, because what I see with the Tesla, right? Because I have a Tesla, they have a supercharger station, but not all cars, not all electric cars can go to a Tesla supercharging station, right? Even if they have the adapter, that doesn't mean it's going to work correctly. And so I think those are the discussions that we need to be talking about, is how do we encourage that infrastructure and not really try to build it, because we don't build that. That's the business community that does it. So that's my 2 cents worth.
Thank you. Ms. Clark, we'll go back to one quick second comment from you
Yes.
before we go to our remote locations.
Yes, one of the reasons I think we need a balanced energy as long as it's clean is I think the elephant in the room is when we had that 104-degree heat wave a year ago or so, and they said, don't charge your EV from 4 to 9 p.m. So if we don't have enough electricity now, how on earth are we going to have enough to do all this stuff that we're planning?
That's why solar is so important. And solar at the location. So on houses, on buildings, not big farms, because that will allow you to continue to do that no matter what the demand is for those particular individual units, which takes it off of the grid. Solar on the facility, in the facilities that currently exist. If we focus on doing that, we will solve our energy needs, right? Because there's enough buildings, there's enough infrastructure that you can have that energy generation be at a local source, and transmission costs are a lot less.
Thank you. We'll now go to remote locations that have been published on our agenda. Madam Clerk, you have better visibility into the hands up in those areas. So I'm going to ask you to call them for me.
Of course, Mr. Vice Chair. We have 3 people online. First up, Tamala Takahashi.
Great, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Great. This is Tamala Takahashi, Burbank City Council member. Thank you for this presentation this morning, much appreciated. I have a question and a comment about personal vehicles, one about buses, and then just kind of a general inquiry. So about personal vehicles, there was one slide that was presented about equity. And I think that's an area that's kind of under examined, and that would be worthwhile to put more attention on. And part of the equity issue, and then we've kind of skirted around it a bit during this conversation, is that since this technology is relatively new, there's really not a lot of EVs on the market. And so if there's not enough EV vehicles on the market for the entire population, who's going to have access first? Of course, it's an equity issue. Also, in general, EV vehicles, when purchased, generally are new vehicles. And so when you look at equity for vehicles, the new purchases are always going to come from the more affluent communities. It's just natural. And so that's a natural consequence of bringing in new technology where there's not enough access to supply, is that the new vehicles and the few that are available will be only accessible to those who have the financial capability to do it. Also, because the technology is relatively new, and because the concept is actually also new. It's many of the vehicles that are sold as EV vehicles are luxury vehicles. They're specialized, luxury, high end. Even if they they're sedans, or there's something that maybe wouldn't normally be a high end car in and of itself, the EV version of the car will be considered luxury and high end. There just aren't on the market. There just aren't vehicles that are considered to be everyday use vehicles that are EVs. So all that said, I think just in general, just recognizing that the system itself is just set up inequitably. So as we are looking at implementing EV regulations, which, we have little control over that, what we have to do, but just really, really leaning into the equity piece, because I think that will help also fuel the push to have more resources available. And to that point, my question actually is, has there been any consideration or discussion around transition vehicles such as plug-in and non-plug-in hybrids that are on the market that are lower cost than EVs, almost the same cost as a gas car, and that are also available as used cars, so that folks who don't have access to new car purchases can still get hybrid cars. We have a non-plug-in hybrid. I have a Prius C. It's a small non-plug-in hybrid. It holds 9 gallons of gas, and it goes 400 miles on that 9 gallons of gas. If I'm driving just locally, it may even go farther. And so I'm wondering if there's any possibility to include a consideration for kind of bolstering the inequity of the push for EV now, and when the resources aren't available, to bring in hybrids as a possible stopgap, or maybe even a long-term transitional solution for equity. So that's my question about hybrids.
Sure. I mean, I can speak a little bit about that. I mean, you're right on point, Tamala, with respect to in general, the inequitable system right now with respect to zero emission vehicles. Although I would like to highlight that both the federal and state, as well as some of the regional programs, are trying to close that gap. I mean, the federal IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, specifically included incentives and rebates for pre-owned, EVs and pre-owned zero-emission vehicles, where if you are, within a household that meet the income eligibility and trying to buy a pre-owned EV or used EVs, there will be roughly around $4,500 that you could be eligible for in terms of rebates, in terms of tax rebates, tax credits. Also, California has the Clean Cars for All program, which also provides low-income communities both, for the rebates for both new as well as for the used EVs or pre-owned EVs. So there are those programs, but still, even with those programs, we all know that EVs are still at the higher prices. We, in a separate study that we did for San Diego Association of Governments, we looked at the price of these pre-owned EVs. They actually, in certain cases, EVs are dropping their prices faster than the gasoline vehicles. So over 5 years span, they can drop almost 50%. So hopefully, as more EVs come into the market, and you're absolutely right, the first owners of these EVs are probably most likely from the affluent communities. But as more EVs come to the market and there is market for used EVs is expanding, we're hopeful that eventually that equity gap gonna get resolved, given all the incentives that are available. With respect to plug-in hybrids, we absolutely, agree with you. It is a transitory technology. It is being covered in the compendium. However, the trend that we're seeing right now in the market is that most of the manufacturers are trying to shift fully to fully battery electric vehicles. There's still some plug-in hybrids available. However, like for example, Chevy Volt, which was a very popular plug-in hybrid, it discontinued, and all of that GM resources went to the Volt with the B, and mainly because having a vehicle with 2 powertrain systems, a gasoline engine and an electric motor and a battery, could sometimes cost a little bit higher than just having a battery and electric motor. So, and the push on the government side is going fully zero emissions, because with plug-in hybrids, although yes, they do offer significant fuel savings and GHG emission reductions, however, depending on how consumers are using those plug-in hybrids, whether they are plugging them actually or not, their benefits are pretty uncertain, which is part of the reasons why there is a push toward a fully battery electric vehicles. But we do agree on that. I do think, that still some of the government programs are still allowing plug-in hybrids to receive incentives, and they are considered as a transitory technology between now and 2035. Even after 2035, California still allows for some of those plug-in hybrids to be sold in California. And we do acknowledge that in the compendium.
Okay, thank you for highlighting that, because I missed that detail. And then my second question is about buses. So you had mentioned in the report and during the presentation that there is a significant difference between the purchasing of an EV bus versus a diesel bus, right? And so I'm curious about, is that something that is going to be there still are diesel buses to purchase now because there's still diesel buses on the market. But my guess is that's not going to last for much longer, right? There's going to be a certain point where only EV, when you buy new buses for your fleet, right, that only EV buses will even be available, partly because the manufacturers know that they have to, and because the diesel ones will have, there'll be no more available to buy because they're not being produced anymore. So I'm just curious, like looking more kind of a long-term plan. Right now in this snapshot, they're more expensive, right? But like looking at a long-term plan, is there any kind of projection out of kind of like getting, when we expect to get to the point where either that will like even out, or that we will have no choice but to go to EV, and how a city can kind of look at their long-term strategy, financial strategy, to time it right, to make that purchase when it's the right time in the right pool of fleet, and how to make that transition not just from a snapshot of how much it costs to get the capital right now, but in just kind of the long-term plan of not just purchasing the fleet, but also maintaining it, making sure there's enough fueling stations, making sure that there's places that will fix the buses, all that kind of long-term planning.
That's a great question. So in 2018, California adopted a regulation called Innovative Clean Transit Regulation, which required all transit agency starting 2023 to have a fraction of their new purchases to be zero emission buses, with the goal of having all transit agents in California to have only zero emission buses by 2040. So as part of that, last July, there was a requirement for every transit agency, for the small transit agency, or earlier I believe in 2021 or 2022, for larger transit agencies in California, to submit to CARB a plan that was called a zero emission bus rollout plan. So every municipality or every transit agency operating in California had to submit a rollout plan, which included, just as you said, a long-term vision over like how these transit agencies are planning to transition to zero emission buses. What are the capital, what are the financial implications, what are the infrastructure implications, and not just even just charging or fueling infrastructure, but what are the electrical infrastructure upgrades that needs to happen both on the grid side as with the facility side to change the maintenance practice that needs to happen. All of those, I believe all of those transit agencies in California, both the small ones that have less than 100 and the larger ones which have more than 100 buses, submitted their rollout plans to CARB, and those are all published online, which basically shows how these transit agencies are looking into this transition. The fact that today transit buses, zero emission transit buses, are way more expensive than their diesel or natural gas counterparts, it's pretty obvious. A part of it is because of the battery prices, but we all know the battery prices are going down significantly. And the Bloomberg has been, at least Bloomberg's studies have shown for cars, we're going to get to parity sometime around 2030 timeframe with respect to cost. I'm not aware of, I have to look, I don't have it top of my head in terms of transit buses when we can get to that parity for buses, but it all depends on how the battery prices can go down over time.
Thank you. Madam Clerk.
Next, we have Britt Huff.
Thank you very much for the very helpful presentation and all of the discussion that's taken place here, especially this last one regarding lack of affordability and equity issues. I had a question about your last couple of slides, 48 and 49, where you address regional adoption barriers. And it does seem a little daunting in terms of reaching 2035 goals when we see some of these barriers, but I'm particularly interested in consumer awareness and the limited knowledge of new technology and incentives and lack of technology confidence. And I'm wondering, when you get your suite of strategies here, how well you feel the effort on public education and community outreach is being balanced, because that seems like a very important area of getting people on board with the whole concept. Is that keeping pace with the rest of the strategies?
So you're absolutely right. I mean, public awareness and consumer confidence is a huge barrier, especially when you get to, I mean, more of like, into the lower income communities and disadvantaged communities that, that basically, those are the households and communities that really depend on their vehicles for their daily jobs and for the duties they do on a daily basis. So that lack of confidence sort of increases there. And also, there is these suite of different incentive programs across federal, state, local, with different eligibility requirements, with different like application requirements, that is really hard to navigate, even for me, that I'm always in this business and helping a lot of other people's getting those. Is keeping track of those is really difficult. So focusing on public outreach and public education is really important. There are some programs, but historically and then anecdotally, most of the programs around zero emission vehicle adoption has been toward giving out incentives and funding and less on the education. So that is the time I feel as we're entering a new set of market. We're past the early adopters and trying to get into the market, which is the mainstream market, and then eventually the late adopters. That education going to play a very, very critical role. That education could have different type of forms and shapes. For example, it could be into the campaigns. It could be a lot of like through the lead by example, like cities using EVs, for their own fleets and showcasing the benefit of those. It could be, the ride shows showing like these EVs for city residents to be able to test those EVs. And we did cover a lot of that within that specific strategy in the compendium in terms of different forms and shapes of public outreach education. But you're absolutely right and on point that this is a very critical thing and sometimes being overlooked.
Thank you.
Thank you. Madam Clerk?
Next, we have Art Bishop.
Yes, thank you. It's a great discussion. I thank everybody. The questions are pretty much going to be for Sam, I believe. I was curious on the 2035 time period for local trucks, and that's sort of what I'm looking at on page 42. Does a local delivery truck, the type of trucks we see within our community delivering produce and meat and other items, will they charge the same way as a regular a zero emission car would charge? And if so, how long would it take to fill a charge on one?
That's a great question. So yes, they can use a local delivery truck, depending on their size. They can use the same, depending on their size, they can use either the same chargers that are for the passenger vehicles. In terms of the standard for charging, they're using the same standard. So they call, for the fast chargers, they call CCS a standard. So it's the basically same plug that will get connected to the vehicle and they can charge. With respect to how long it will take to charge them, it depends on the battery capacity of those vehicles and how many miles are driving. So just to put it in perspective, a typical delivery truck will need about 1 kilowatt hour for every 1 mile that is being driven on the road. So if they drive like 50 miles a day, roughly, or somewhere around that, they need 50 kilowatt hour of energy. If they're using, for example, 150 kilowatt, charger, that should take them roughly around 20 to 30 minutes to fully charge that vehicle. For a passenger vehicle, every mile it's around 0.3 kilowatt hour. So, and passenger cars are driving much less, than a delivery truck. So if they drive like 20 miles or 30 miles a day, they probably need roughly around 10 kilowatt hour. So the same 150 kilowatt chargers, they can be charged much faster. So those are the different times, different charging time depending on their operation and if they want to plug every single night. And then again, if they want to wait until their batteries are fully depleted and charged, there's going to be different times. We did cover some of that in the compendium in terms of the charging times for some of these vehicles, from being fully depleted to being fully charged, and how those charging times could be different.
Okay, thank you, Sam. Sam, I realize it's not till 2045, but on our trucks, on our heavy duty trucks that are coming from the LA port, I've been Apple Valley on I-15, about halfway between Los Angeles and Las Vegas. My concern is they're being able to, right now, I don't have any charging for heavy duty, which I understand because of the time frame. But my concern is, are they going to be able to make it from the 400 miles, because it's about 200 miles just from where I live in Apple Valley to Las Vegas, from the ports all the way to Las Vegas? And then I realize this is a way off, but once they leave the state of California, where the state is so far ahead of the rest of the nation on all these chargers, what do they do then? Because this truck is heading to Mississippi. And I want to make sure this long haul truck doesn't have to stop, reload into a diesel vehicle and keep on going.
That's a great question. So with respect to drayage trucks, which the California's regulation require all drayage trucks to be zero emission by 2035. Drayage trucks refer to trucks that are visiting ports or intermodal rail yards in California. Those are considered as drayage trucks. Those trucks typically, based on our assessment, drive somewhere between 160 to 200 miles a day. So that's their typical operation. They typically take either 2 round trips, each round trip being around 80 miles. This is on average. There are some trucks that goes higher and some that goes lower, but an average drayage truck is roughly around 160 to 200 miles a day. Currently, there are technologies, zero emission Class 8 trucks that can go 300 miles plus on a single charge. Volvo is one of those, and Tesla Semi, according to the latest testing, it can go north of 400, even up to 500 miles a day with their long range version. So there are technologies that can take on those mileages on a single charge, but they are definitely more expensive. And there are limited number of those technologies. So eventually, as we get to 2035, the hope is that there will be more of those available. But today, with respect to drayage trucks, there are technologies that can be purchased and be used to meet that 160 to 200 mile daily ranges with a single overnight charge.
Okay, thank you. I just have visions of the long haul on I-15 and somewhere around Mountain Pass, all of a sudden batteries start dying out and I'm blocking the freeway and no one can move forward, which would be great for Brightline West, the all-electric train that's going by at 200 miles an hour. It'll sell a lot of seats. I'm curious, you talk about ZE off-road equipment, and I'm pretty sure you're talking about forklifts and things like that, but I need to ask, where I'm from in the high desert, there's a lot of off-road motorcycling. There's a lot of off-road dune buggies and rail bikes. I'm hoping, I'm assuming, and we all know what that word means, that the EV laws are not applicable for motorcycles and these type of vehicles, or are they?
So no, motorcycles are not yet subject to the zero emission vehicle regulation. CARB is working on, California Air Resources Board is working on a regulation for motorcycles, which the proposed version of it was released, I believe it was in December. It hasn't been yet adopted by the board, and I believe it was only requiring motorcycles, small motorcycles. It was less than a certain thresholds on their engine capacity. It was either less than 100 cc or 60 cc's. engines that need to be zero emission. The rest of them, they need to meet the Euro 5 standards, etc. But that is still a proposal. It hasn't been adopted by CARB. So there might be some requirements for zero emission motorcycle down the road, but it sounds like it's mostly for the very smaller motorcycle, not the larger ones.
Okay, thank you. I'm not sure if you know the answer for this. With the state deficit,
I'm going to ask you to, that for this to be your last question. We do have a few more items on the
Okay.
agenda that we can go forward, so thank you.
with the state deficit, are any of the actions that are trying to help these EVs, are they affected by the governor's change in budget? And I just real quick, I want to thank Phil from Santa Monica. Phil, Apple Valley has 75,000 people. We have 2 chargers. Neither one of them work. But Sam, if you could answer that about the deficit.
With respect to deficit, I don't have the exact answer on that. I know, the new budget, because of the deficit, there has been some cut to the climate budget, but I don't know exactly the details of how the incentive programs for EVs have been impacted yet. I know there has been some cuts to the climate budget, which EV incentives are part of the climate budget of the governor.
Okay, that's what I thought. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bishop. Madam Clerk, did we have any virtual hands go up other than those locations?
No, that was all.
Okay, before we go on to agenda item number 6, Madam Clerk, I do believe you have an announcement to make.
Yes, Chair Deborah Robertson wanted the record to reflect that while she is participating remotely, she's not at the remote location listed on the agenda. And she wanted to announce that at the time that she voted, she wasn't aware we were voting on the item. Therefore, she'd like to remove her yes vote on the consent calendar. So she just wanted that reflected for the record.
Thank you for making that clarification. We will now go on to agenda item number 6. This is the Water Action Resolution White Paper update on page 51 of our agendas. Do we have any members of the public who wish to speak on this item? First, anybody in person on this item? Appears to be none. Madam Clerk, do we have any remote locations or virtual hands indicating?
I see no raised hands.
Okay. Like to go ahead and ask Kim Clark to present on this item. Kim is the planning supervisor. Just a reminder for those of us as we go asking questions and getting some of our answers, we do have a couple more items on the agenda to get through. So I appreciate some help with that. Thank you. Ms. Clark.
Great. Thanks, Mr. Vice Chair, as well as Madam Chair. Thanks very much for having me today. I'm going to be providing an update on SCAG's work related to the Water Action Resolution, as well as our upcoming phase 1 of the Water White Paper, which is actually directed by Regional Counsel for SCAG to pursue and complete. So under the leadership and guidance of this committee, as many of you might remember, we drafted the Water Action Resolution that subsequently went to the Regional Council in October of 2022. At that meeting, the Regional Council unanimously voted to adopt the Water Action Resolution, affirming the drought and water shortage emergency in Southern California, and called on local and regional partners to join together and adopt an all-of-the-above approach to address water challenges in the SCAG region. Specifically, the Water Action Resolution called on SCAG to help local jurisdictions address the housing crisis in a drier environment to meet housing production needs, improve the resilience of water supply by fostering the adoption of alternative groundwater technologies, better utilize the water resources that we do have, such that the water that comes through our region during extreme storms like we're experiencing today helps support the implementation of taking advantage of that new water supply through green infrastructure, gray water usage systems, and urban cooling programs. And finally, the Water Action Resolution called on us to prepare a white paper, as I mentioned before, on the state of water in the region that addresses the needs, challenges, and opportunities for multiple sectors. And since 2022, SCAG has helped local jurisdictions meet housing production needs in a drier environment through the Regional Utility Supporting Housing, otherwise known as RUSH, Industry Forum, as well as the pilot program. Also, we included regional planning policies and implementation strategies in Draft Connect SoCal 2024 that help to foster water resilience, specifically the adoption of alternative groundwater recharge technologies, stormwater caption systems, urban cooling infrastructure, gray water usage systems that can reduce water demand and overall increase water supply. We also have a policy in the plan that outlines a key theme through the plan, which is promoting sustainable water use planning, practices and storage that can improve regional water security and resilience in a drier environment. Finally, SCAG has created new information resources like our recently launched Climate Resilient Urban Greening Best Practices webpage, which you may remember from a previous presentation at this committee. This information resource is aimed to help local jurisdictions increase tree canopy cover to address extreme heat, reduce stormwater runoff, and replenish groundwater. As mentioned, the Water Action Resolution calls on local and regional partners to join together to adopt an all of the above approach in addressing water issues in the region, which includes reducing water use, improving water conservation, reuse and efficiency, enhancing water systems, health and resilience, pursuing resources to support implementation of new water supply and storage opportunities, and also fostering investments in water infrastructure and conservation practices that support the region's economic and population growth, and also fosters planning for the regional housing needs. A key piece of this work is developing a white paper on the state of water in the region that addresses multiple sectors and examines the issues related to water acquisition, storage, supply, demand, and quality. We will complete this work in 2 phases and first start out with actions that can help us hone in on SCAG's potential role in helping to address water issues in the region. This will involve research, stakeholder interviews, and a landscape analysis of water management practices and actors in Southern California, beginning with a water management stakeholder mapping exercise, multiple sector and equity stakeholder interviews, current and emerging issues assessment for water management, water data landscape analysis, and finally, recommendations on SCAG's role in the water management ecosystem. And up to date, I'm happy to share that we have completed a request for proposals, and we're in the process to secure a consultant and in the final contract negotiation stages. We anticipate starting this phase 1 of the Water Action White Paper in March within the coming weeks of this year, and it will carry through until February of 2025. Finally, phase 2 of the Water Action White Paper will have a broader study that focuses on identifying the challenges and opportunities to support sustainable and resilient development and address issues related to water acquisition, supply, storage, demand, and quality. Additionally, phase 2 will include recommendations for practical ways to support implementation agencies. And the Water White Paper scope includes development of sustainable development strategies and approaches, case studies, water resilient strategies for future growth. Finally, the white paper with recommendations, and then coming together as a region in a water resilience forum to look at those recommendations and identify opportunity areas. This work, we anticipate beginning in summer of 2025, so it'll follow after phase 1 and also continue to February of 2027. So with that, I'm happy to take your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Clark. We will now entertain comments from members of the EC. Just a reminder, if a member of this body is attending remotely, but not at a location specified on the agenda, you may observe, but may not participate in any discussion or voting of this body. So we'll go first to those in person. Ms. Crosswhite.
So just real quick, I'm sure you already are, but just a reminder to make sure that as we do the study, that we make sure to reach out to the parts of our region that aren't covered by the State Water Project. Because I know that that was a big piece of what I think drove having this conversation. But there's definitely issues like in our region around saltwater intrusion and risks to groundwater and other things that in the parts of our region that aren't covered by the state water project. So just a reminder to make sure that we cover some of those areas. So thank you.
Thank you.
We now go to the Honorable Jennifer Stark.
Thank you. I'm just wondering if there's a plan to also work with the NGOs, like environmental groups.
Yes, absolutely. That's included in the scope of work. We'll be working with community-based organizations and other nonprofit agencies.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I think it's so important to include everybody rather than be aggrieved when comments come in that are counter to what's been studied. So thank you.
Thanks.
Great observation. We now go on to the Honorable Oscar Ortiz.
Thank you, and thank you for the presentation. I wanted to make sure that as SCAG, when we come out to share education with our communities, I really want to make sure that we include the connection between native plants, urban greening, and heat islands. And so being strategic about how we're using these funds that are coming down for reducing our water use, right? So right now in India, one of the things we did, we got some money, I think it was $900,000 and we're using it for turf removal. But at the same time, as we increase the rebates, so we're going from $2 to $3 per square foot for turf removal, but we're requiring for that extra dollar that you plant native trees in your garden. And so what that's going to do is help us reduce our water use, increase the urban greening, and hopefully along the way also teach the residents how to plant those trees to cool the homes and reduce our emissions in the homes as well. So just making those connections, helping cities make those connections and be more strategic about how we're using these funds that are coming down from the state or federal government. I think that's something that I would really like to see us do. Thanks.
Thank you. Now moving on to the Honorable Rick Dennison.
Thank you, Kim, for the presentation so far. Can you just briefly talk about what would be the leading alternative groundwater recharge opportunity that we have?
Yeah, absolutely. So a good example is Orange County's groundwater recharge project, where they're actually taking gray water I forget the exact term. It's often referred to as toilet to tap, where they're taking those water resources and they're inserting it to areas along the coast that have connections to groundwater areas. And by taking that black water or gray water and putting it through a series of infrastructure areas and soil basically cleaning processes, and then finally a final process of making sure that is sanitary for drinking, they're taking the opportunity of including a resource of water that we already have, making sure that it no longer is wasted, and also replenishes groundwater.
Thank you for that. That's something we've used in the desert for many years, was taking the opportunity of gray water, but to see that more dense populations are starting to look at that as an alternative to help offset our losses of water. So thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Dennison. We will now go to those remote locations and then virtual hand raises. Madam Clerk, do we have anybody at our remote locations?
We do have one hand raise of Tamala Takahashi.
Thank you, Mr. Hashi.
Hi, thank you. Yes, I appreciate this so much. I'm really looking forward to the results of this white paper. I mean, I think we're looking at a lot of things like energy and climate change, but water is a resource that is life, right? I mean, and so I'm so glad to see that we're working on this in SCAG. I appreciate the previous question about recycling water to be potable in various ways. And I'm wondering in this white paper, is it also going to be consideration for really reducing the need to bring in potable water in the first place, or water in the first place into the system, because the system itself is reusing its own water. For example, industrial and commercial uses, it's a lot of water gets used and then let out into the LA River or into the ocean. An example in Burbank, we have a power plant, Magnolia Power Plant. 100% of the water that we use in the power plant is recycled. And so I'm just wondering if there's going to be also part of this white paper that's going to be looking at ways that local agencies and local users of large amounts of water can really reduce the need to bring in water from outside the system.
Yes, definitely. So we'd be looking at, stormwater capture strategies, as well as groundwater recharge strategies to overall increase the supply of water in the region, and not leaning on other sources of which have traditionally used the importation of water. One other thing that we're doing here at SCAG is we were just awarded a grant from the Strategic Growth Council to look further into nature-based solutions and the economic value that agricultural and natural lands provide, not just for water, but for a modicum of benefits throughout the region.
Great, thank you. And just I want to offer to the other folks that are in the room, if you have a power plant in your jurisdiction, feel free to reach out to our MAG plant. They love to do a tour, and they like to talk about how we use 100% water recycling. And so if other folks want to hear from them, then they're very open to discussing how we do that.
Thank you, Ms. Takahashi. Madam Clerk, do we have anybody else online?
No further.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. We look forward to seeing this document develop, and please keep us informed as it continues to do so. We will now go on to agenda item number 7, Governor's Budget Update, Regional Early Action Planning Grant 2021, REAP 2.0. This is on page 92 of our agendas. First, do we have any member of the public who wishes to speak on this item? We'll start with those in person.
Yes, I'm just gonna do this, I'll be in the car.
I see no raised hands.
Okay, so we have none in person, no raised hands online.
Right, I see no online either.
Okay, just a reminder for those participating remotely to mute your microphones when not in use. So we are going to go ahead and receive an update presentation on this. Please go ahead.
Yes, good morning. My name is Francisco Barajas. I'm the Senior Legislative Affairs Analyst, speaking on behalf of Ms. Javiera Cartagena. This is just our verbal report. We don't have a presentation, but we'll be more than happy to provide any documentation at the conclusion of this as requested. And I'm here to just provide a brief update on the Regional Early Action Planning Grant, REAP 2.0 program, funding specifically from the governor's budget. So in his January budget, the governor proposed a $291 billion budget with a $1.2 billion in cuts for housing programs. Included in those cuts is $300 million for the REAP program. Now, for those who may not be aware, REAP is the only program specifically and exclusively designed to implement our region's sustainable community strategies. So while California is in the midst of a housing crisis, and simultaneously the governor and the legislature have set ambitious goals to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, of which vehicle emissions are the largest contributors, we feel that cutting REAP funding threatens our ability as cities, counties, tribal governments, and transit agencies to address the housing crisis while meeting the state's important climate goals. So for a little background on where we are with existing funding here at SCAG, we have an MOU with Housing and Community Development for $237 million in REAP funds that we entered into last summer with the agency. Since then, SCAG has sub-allocated and awarded $192 million to cities, counties, and tribal governments across our 6-county Southern California region for projects to accelerate housing production and implement the GHG reducing strategies contained within our Connect SoCal, which is our Regional Transportation Plan Sustainable Community Strategy. So these projects are crucial for supporting our efforts to achieve our RENA goal of 1.34 million units and GHG reduction targets. Reducing or delaying funding will compromise the program's integrity and have severe negative impacts on cities and counties across the region and the state. So in terms of advocacy with what we've done, both the Assembly Committee on Budget and the Senate Budget and Fiscal Review Committee held full budget hearings on Tuesday, January 3rd, marking the start of the legislature's budget process. In preparation for the budget hearing, SCAG authored a budget advocacy letter in response to the governor's budget proposal, including our request that REAP 2.0 funding be protected, which we distributed to the budget committees in advance of their hearings. Also included in the letter distribution